Adding detail to our models can be a little bit tricky, but it doesn't have to be that way. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create the detail for this door right here without having to do any sculpt on the high poly and keeping it procedural so that we can change it anytime we want. This video is sponsored by Adobe Substance 3D Painter, and I'm very happy to be showcasing all of these techniques because, as we know, Substance 3D Painter is the best software out there to texture our assets for commercial work, for our games, for our films, for anything 3D related. So let's go. This is the model that we're going to be working with. It's a very simple low poly. Of course, I have the high poly, and we're going to go through the baking process real quick. And I am going to be using a high amount of resolution. I have 4 UDEMs for this particular door because I want to make sure that you guys see all of the detail. But you can adapt all of the techniques that we're going to be looking at to any resolution that you're going to be working with. Let's jump real quick to the croissant right here. And I'm going to, of course, load my high poly. And there's a very cool new feature that we have inside Substance 3D Painter, which is the auto cage feature. So now, every single one of my elements, you can see I split all of my different beams and sections into its own high poly and low poly. All of them are generating the cage, and they're expanding the cage to the specific size that they need for the details that we want to bake down. We can still play around with the max frontal distance and the max rear distance if you are having some issues with your bakes, but it should give you a closer bake for all of your different parts. I'm going to set the match to by mesh name, and I'm going to change the anti-aliasings to 16x, and then we can start baking. Of course, we're going to see our normal map, the world space normal, very important for some specific textures, our ambient occlusion, which is one of the most important maps to add all of the dirt and grunge to our element. We also have our curvature map for the nice edges and the little crevices that we're going to be adding. Finally, the position, and of course, the thickness map, which I'm going to show you a little secret at the end to add just that little extra detail to the color. Once our bake is done, we can check it out here in the main viewport, and as you can see, everything looks very, very clean. We're not really getting any contamination between the different beams, and all of the detail has been baked down quite nice. Now, before we start with the height carving, which is a very cool technique that I'm going to show you, I do want to add a very simple wood material so that we have an idea of how the door is going to look. Now, if you've been living under a rock, the assets library is now available inside of Substance 3D Painter. And if you have an active subscription, then it doesn't require any sort of credits to download any of the assets, models, or HDRIs that you might need. So I can literally go to this tab right here, look for wood pine, and just download that one right there. I'm actually going to download this one instead. I want to use the H pine wood right there. I'm going to go to assets, and there we go. I'm just going to drag and drop this into my element, and look at how nice that looks. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the tiling to 2 to get a little bit more fibers because it's supposed to be a very big door. And I'm going to rotate all of this to 90 degrees. This is very, very important. I built this asset specifically because I wanted to make sure that all of the UVs of the beams were going in a nice straight direction. And as you can see, by doing that, all of my UVs for this dyable materials are going to be following the grain of the wood. I do feel like the height information is a little bit too high, and just lower this to something like 10%. We haven't even started, and we already have a very, very nice base for this door right here. I want to make it a little bit browner, so I'm going to add a new fill layer right here. Grab a reddish, orangish color, and on the color information right here, I'm going to change this to multiply. And then I can lower the intensity right here. And this is a way for me to sort of like darken the colors. I usually like to start with dark tones and then work my way up to the highlights of our element. You could, of course, also go here to the wood element, switch the hue a little bit, or play with any of the properties like the wood color variation, the Bain's contrast, even the roughness right here. This is the magic of procedural materials, the fact that you can change so many things, and every single asset that you do is going to be slightly different. Keep in mind, we always have the seed option right here that we can click, and every time we click it, we're gonna have a slightly different variation on the color. So if there's a couple of wood grains or wood elements that you don't like, just click on this seed until you find something that looks a little bit better. This one, for instance, I really like. Now we're gonna go to one of the big tools that I want to show you in this video, and that is height carving. So I'm gonna grab here a fill layer, and I'm gonna set this fill layer to white for now. I'm gonna turn on height, and I'm gonna push the height all the way to the bottom section right here. I'm gonna call this layer carvings, and I'm gonna control G to group it. This one's gonna be called height layers. So anything that I'm going to be doing height related, it's going to be on this folder right here. I'm going to right click and add a black mask. And what's going to happen now is if I grab any of my brushes and I start going across some parts of the wood, you can see that it's going to look like we're actually carving into the wood because all of this is height information. We're pushing the illusion of the surface up and down thanks to the height map that eventually is going to be converted to a normal map, so to give this sort of like effect. Now, here's where things get very, very fun. I'm going to go to Photoshop, and I'm going to have this interesting pattern things looking here. Like, what is this? Well, what I did is I went ahead and I used the UV layout of my door to start planning how I want these patterns to be carved into my door. So instead of having to go to my high poly and sculpt everything and then having to make changes or decide for other patterns, I can do it in a very easy file right here, which is the black and white masks. Once we have exported that PSD file, we just bring it in here, we just import it normally, and I'm gonna right click on my mask, I'm gonna add a fill layer, and I'm gonna drag and drop this one right here. And as you can see, the patterns appear on the door, and we're using this layer to drive the hide information. So instead of having to hand draw everything or move things around, I can just plan things ahead of time here on my Photoshop file, make sure that I plan things really nicely, and then just bring that into Substance. Now, this is not all. If we go here to our assets folder or assets panel, we can go down here to the little arrow, and we can activate the automatic updates for our assets panel and for the resources used in this project, such as the texture that we have right here. So now if I go back to Photoshop and I change the patterns or add more stuff to the whole thing, the only thing I need to do is save this file, and boom, it's gonna automatically update whatever it is I did in my Photoshop file and apply it here to the carvings that we're working on this hide layers. It's very efficient, and it's an excellent tool if you're working again in a studio environment with a client and they're constantly telling you to modify or move things around. Imagine having to do all of this sculpts inside of another sculpting software, and then you need to go back, erase, resculpt, and rechange. Like, no. That's not a smart way to approach a lot of iteration elements like the ones that we're doing right here. So with a little addition magic right here, I'm adding this tree, this pattern, and all of these elements to my Photoshop file. I'm just gonna save my file, jump back into Substance, and boom, we get all of the information again automatically updated thanks to this new feature, the auto updater for Substance 3D Painter. Now, this is not it. We're just starting with the whole process. I'm gonna go back to the color, and I'm gonna grab a darker color so that it looks like we are actually burned this thing into the wood. I'm gonna change this to overlay. That looks pretty cool. So as you can see, this is what my mask is doing right now. But there's a couple of things that I want you to look at. First of all, some of the textures that I used to build this pattern are not really high quality. There's some like compression issues and some general things that we can fix by using some filters. So the first filter I'm going to be using is blur filter right here. I'm going to use the blur filter, and that's going to soften everything up. And again, if we go to the material, you're going to see that yes, it's going to look a little bit nicer. It's going to look a little bit smoother. We're going to get a more intense curvature there on the carving, because instead of having a very intense cut, right, black and white, we actually have a little bit of a gradient. But I don't particularly like the effect that we're getting right here. So I'm going to use the blur, but I'm going to use it very softly. And now I'm going to show you a new filter that we have that's very cool. And this filter is called Bevel Smooth. So the Bevel Smooth will do a very cool process where every single black and white element, you can see it right here, is going to be smoothed and beveled at the same time. I'm going to definitely bring the distance down, so something like this. I'm going to bring the smoothing down a little bit as well, but you can really see the difference. Look at the big changes that we have right here. This is how it started with just a very basic element. The blur gives us more depth, and then the Bevel Smooth sharpens all of the elements, all of the corners, and all of the points to really make it seem like a carving. We're going to be playing with a little bit of these things. We can maybe use a little bit of the curve offset, for instance, to make sure that we get more of the values of our element. But this Bevel Smooth, guys, a really powerful tool, again, to do all of these elements procedurally without having to worry about the high poly of our element. That's not all. I want to add one more little detail here to this height layer. Right click, add a filter, and now we're going to be adding, of course, the blur slope. The blur slope is a very damaging or very crazy filter that breaks up all of the edges of our mask. First of all, I'm going to change the intensity divider to 10 so that the damage is a lot smaller, and I'm going to change the blending mode so that it does not use a blur but rather max. What max will do is it will only affect the outer edges of our element, right? Like the maximum points. If we change this to min, what's going to happen is going to go to the inside of the element, and I want to affect or carve out the outer edges of the object. So I'm going to go here to max. And if we go over here, look at that. We get this very nice, interesting chipped effect across all of the different elements of our door. Every single carving, all of them are getting this very nice filter effect in a procedural way, in a non-destructive way that we can at any point go into Photoshop, change our main element, and modify the result that we're going to be seeing here. This is why this process is so magical. Now, let's start building a couple of layers. We have a nice construction right here. I'm actually going to reduce the amount of color that we have right here, and I'm going to be building this in new layers. So I'm going to start with a very basic dirt layer. Let's go once more here to our Substance 3D assets, and let's look for some dirt. And I want to use this loose dirt scramble. So I'm just going to download that directly into my assets folder. Now we just drag and drop this in the top stack. I'm going to set this to multiply as well. Multiply is a very nice filter because it darkens the values. This layer has a very light value. It's going to multiply it against the values of the door, and it's going to make it darker. Look at the texture right there. Very cool texture. Right click, add a black mask. Right click, add a generator. And we're going to add, of course, our dirt generator. We all love the dirt generator. And this is immediately going to make our whole thing look a lot nicer. But you might notice something interesting. The carvings that we have are not really affecting the dirt generator. If we turn them off, you can see that the dirt is not really affecting or going into the crevices of the elements. To do that, we need to use anchor points. And one thing that you guys might not know is that you can actually generate an anchor point not only from layers, but from folders as well. So I'm gonna go to the folder right here, and I'm just gonna generate an anchor point. It's gonna be called hide layers. And now if I want to add more layers, let's say I do a different set of carvings, or I do any sort of like cuts or elements, anything that lives inside of this folder will generate a new anchor point with the hide layer information, and all of the information for that matter. If we go back to the dirt layer, the only thing we need to do is go here to micro normal, go to anchor points, select our hide layers, change the reference channel to hide because that's the information that we want, go to micro hide, anchor points, hide layers, change the information again to hide, and then go up here to micro detail and turn this both on. And there you go. Look at that. So now, as you can see, all of the hide information from this folder is actually affecting this dirt generator that we have up here, making it look way more realistic. Don't make the mistake that everyone does when using this generator. Always try to break it up a little bit. I'm gonna show you my traditional technique, which is just add a fill layer right here. I'm gonna add something like a clouds filter, press Alt and click on the mask to see what's going on, increase the balance, increase the contrast, play a little bit with the scale, and then multiply this against the previous layer. So as you can see, what we're doing here is we're using these dark spots of the clouds to break up some of the dirt information. Right now I feel like the contrast might be a little bit too much, so let's soften it up. Let's increase the balance a little bit, and we can always play a little bit with the overlay right here. So that's it. You can see that the clouds layer can really help us break up that effect and allow us to have something that looks a little bit more believable. I'm still gonna push the multiply layer a little bit lower here because that amount of dirt is way too much. Now for the metal edgeware, we're gonna do a very similar process. I'm gonna go here to my base layers, grab one of the base colors, usually a light color like that one right here. Let's call this edges. Right click, add a black mask, right click, add a generator, and we're gonna add, of course, our metal edgeware. We are gonna have the exact same issue. Right now, the metal edgeware is being applied only to the edges, and it's not really going into all of the nice carvings that we did with the hide layers that we have over here. Go down here, micro normal, anchor points, hide channel, micro hide, anchor points, hide channel, micro details, and turn this to on. There we go. So now, as you can see, we are going to be affecting the elements the way we would expect. The only issue, as we already know, this is affecting things too uniformly. We're not really getting a nice result. Right click, add a fill layer. Let's add the clouds 2 again. Alt and click. I'm going to change this to triplanar projection and multiply this. That way, as you can see, the metal edgeware is not going to be present everywhere. And as with all of the things that we've done so far, all of this is procedural. So at any point, I can play here with the balance or with the contrast of the clouds noise and generate more or less detail depending on what I want. This one, I like to set to linear dodge because it really punches the color to the high points and then bring the opacity down. That way it's not too overwhelming. I still feel like my dirt might be a bit much, so lower that a bit. Because if you do things with too much grunge, it becomes too noisy, right? Like people don't really know where to look at, and we already have a lot of detail going on thanks to these elements right here, so definitely you need to change that. So this to me would be the basic construction of the door, but we're not finished yet. We're gonna go all in with this one. The next couple of layers that we're gonna be adding are gonna help us to push this asset to a more interesting level. And the first thing that I want to do is I want to do a little bit of ground dirt from our element. I'm gonna grab the same dirt material that we used before, but I'm gonna change the color. Instead of having this brown color, I want this to be more like moss or some sort of like organic matter growing on the bottom part. So I'm gonna go for this sort of like dark greenish color. Very desaturated. Moss is a lot more desaturated than we might think. I even like the little leaves that we have right there. I feel like they're gonna add a nice effect. And this one I'm gonna try overlay first. Look at that. Very nice, dark, intense green going on right there. And we're gonna build our masks again in a very simple way. I'm gonna add a black mask. The first mask that I want to add is going to be a generator, and it's going to be a position generator. The position generator uses one of the maps that we have, the world space normal and the position gradient, to know what parts of the object are closer to the ground and what parts of the object are closer to the ceiling. So if we flip this right here with the global invert, as you can see, we're going to have this very nice effect going from the bottom part of our element to the top part, which is very realistic. We see this in structures in the outside world. If we click Alt and click on the mask again, you're going to see that, well, it's relatively boring, right? So let's break it up a little bit. Now, the interesting thing is we can actually break this up with some of the generators that we already have. So I would expect there to be a little bit more of this grunge on the inner edges, right? Like on the crevices. So I can add a generator right here, add the metal edgeware generator, play a little bit with the wear level, and then multiply this against the first layer, and look at that. We're now going to have a little bit more of that damage on the inside part of our object. We're actually doing it the opposite way, so I need to invert this, and we can play again with all of the processes or the elements that we have right here to get an interesting effect, where some of the edges are a little bit more protected than others, right? Like this sort of like moss is not growing everywhere. This is not where we should finish. I always recommend that you add a paint layer, and using a brush like the dirt brush, for instance, you manually remove or add some of the elements that you might want. So for instance, since the door is going to be used a little bit more, it might not have as much damage as some of the other parts. So the outer pillars that are exposed to the elements a bit more might have more of this effect. And if, for instance, we see a piece of wood that recently fell off in this part, well, we might expect not to see that much damage on that particular point. This specific artistic decision is one of the most important things that people often overlook when creating their assets. Because if you let the software do everything, it's going to do a really good job, but it will never achieve that artistic touch, that like deliberate decision of why we want certain elements to be missing. So adding again these little details here and there, like making sure that you have the final artistic say on where we're going to have this dirt and these elements, is really going to elevate your assets to the next level. I'm probably going to turn the opacity down just a bit. I do want to have a high contrast, but maybe not that much. Another very common thing that we can do here is use a light generator to add a little bit more importance or a little bit more detail to the top part of our element. I'm gonna add a new layer right here, and I'm gonna imagine that there's like a warm light hitting our element from the top. I'm gonna go for this sort of like orangey vibe. Right click, add a black mask, right click, I'm gonna add a generator, and this is gonna be my light generator. I love the light generator because it's literally like shining a light into our object, and we can use these little sliders right here to tell this thing where we want the light to be hitting. It also looks like a layer of dust, which can look quite nice in this particular case. I'm gonna decrease the highlight glossiness because, as you can see, I want to have sort of like a soft grading going into the bottom parts, and then I'm gonna set this to linear dodge. And what linear dodge will do is it will multiply the colors and it will brighten up those elements. This one I usually keep very low, something like 5%, 10% at most, but you should see a little bit of a change there on the values on the element. Let's increase the linear dodge so that we can see the effect a little bit more. The door is gonna look a little bit lighter on the top and of course a little bit darker on the bottom. We can go a little bit grungier. So I'm going to use one of my favorite layers, or one of my favorite materials, which is the rust material. I'm going to add a rust material right here. Add a black mask, and I'm going to use another generator, which is going to be an ambient occlusion generator. This is going to hit the ambient occlusion parts of our element. Invert this. I really don't want to use any of the like cavity information right now. This is just like a general shadow that I want to add. Set this to overlay. And I'm going to use this to darken the whole thing a little bit and get that sort of like interesting effect on the corners of our elements. Definitely going to change the color to a little bit of a darker, more desaturated brown. Actually, let me show you another generator that's very cool. It's relatively new as well. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to go for like a dark color as well, something like that. Black mask. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a paint layer. And have you ever seen those like places where you have a little bit of like dirt and rust and it sort of like drips down? So I'm going to go to some of the corners of the door, not all of them. Now that we have those spots right there, I'm going to alt and click so that we can see the mask. Right click, and I'm going to add a new filter, and this is called the blur directional. This is very cool because the blur directional, as you can see right here, will try to blur the element following a specific angle. In this case, I want to blur it so that it goes down, like that. And we can increase the intensity, and you can see how it shifts it, in this case, in the direction of the UVs. So some of these lines are going on a different direction. We can clean them up in just a second, but it gives this very nice sort of like smeared effect to the whole thing. Set this to something like a multiply and play a bit with the opacity. Now, we really haven't done any changes to the roughness. That's another pass that we definitely need to add. I'm going to go all the way down to my fill layer on my height maps, and I'm going to turn on the roughness on this one, and I probably want this to be a little bit glossy. Sort of like if they added paint or something. There you go. So now, as you can see, when the light shines through the object, we're going to have a little bit of an interesting glint happening on some of the crevices of our element. I'm going to do some bolts. I'm going to grab a dark material right here, turn on metallic, make this very metallic, add a black mask right here, go to our brushes, like the basic hard brush right here, and I'm just going to start painting some bolts that I want to add. I'm going to go back to the material, use height information as well, and push this height information up. And we can use, again, some of the filters that we just saw. So I'm going to use filter, and let's try a Bevel Smooth. Definitely decrease the distance, decrease the smoothing, push the color up a bit. Let's turn on roughness. I don't want to make them a little bit rough. And everything's procedural. So we can, at any point, go to the mask and change the size of those bolts if they're too big or too small. Once we turn on the Bevel Smooth, it should give us a little bit more of an interesting detail right there. Now, remember I told you I was going to show you a very cool trick with the thickness map? Well, wood has the property similar to skin where there can be a little bit of surface scattering. I'm going to add a new fill layer. For this layer, I'm going to fill it with a very bright yellow right here. I'm going to add a black mask. I'm going to add a fill layer. And on this fill layer, I'm going to look for the thickness map. I'm going to add right click, add the levels, and just invert this thing. And look at this. All of the thin areas of my wood are getting this sort of like yellowish tint. We can push these values right here to make sure that only the sharpest lines get that particular effect, like so. And once we have this, we can set this again to something like linear dodge and bring this all the way down to just brighten up the corners a little bit. It's almost nothing, but without having to go to complex shader stuff, it can really add a bit of life to the whole thing. And we can even change the colors. You can try something a little bit more orangey, for instance, and you can see how it really affects and changes the whole sort of like vibe that we're getting from the object. A simple layer, but a very powerful layer. So that's it, my friends. This is the end of the tutorial. Hopefully you learned a lot of very cool tips and tricks for your own work. And hopefully you can see the power of working this way, procedurally, with masks, with layers, making sure that at any point we can go back, change something, and it will automatically update and affect every single thing we've done so far. Thank you once again to our friends at Substance 3D Painter, and please make sure to check their channels. They are sharing a lot of very cool information there as well. Make sure to check again Substance 3D Painter, download it, use it, and texture amazing assets for your projects. That's it for now, my friends. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Let me know in the comments what you think, and don't forget, always learning, always improving. I'll see you back on the next one.